and welcome everybody to the Cyberpsychology seminar series. My name is Julie Ancis, and I direct the Cyberpsychology program at New Jersey Institute of Technology, otherwise known as NJIT. A couple of housekeeping rules before we get started is to please keep your microphones muted for now while our speaker speaks. We'll have a question and answer period the last 15-20 minutes or so of this seminar session, which goes till 2 o'clock. If you could please put your questions in the chat with the word question in the prefix, or the word question right before your question, so I'm able to differentiate comments from questions. That would be extremely helpful. The Cyberpsychology seminar series is designed to showcase many different facets of research and scholarship within the field of cyberpsychology. The series will feature some of the nation's leading experts at the emerging intersections of psychology and technology. It is an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Rand Waltzman with us today. Dr. Waltzman has 35 years of experience performing research in artificial intelligence applied to domains including social media and cognitive security in the information environment. He is currently a senior information scientist at the RAND Corporation in Santa Monica, California. Prior to joining RAND, he was the acting chief technology officer of the Software Engineering Institute of Carnegie Mellon University. Before that, he served as program manager in the Information Innovation Office of DARPA, otherwise known as the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Dr. Waltzman also served as chief scientist for the Applied Sciences Laboratory at Lockheed Martin, and he was an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden, where he conducted research in artificial intelligence technology, among other things. He has a list of other accolades, and so we don't have the time to go through them all, but I wanted to give you some highlights. He's an internationally known expert in the field of security, information, disinformation. And the title of his talk today is Disinformation, It's the Thought That Counts. Great title. So thank you again, Rand, for joining us. You're our first speaker, and I'm so honored. And I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I'm very honored to be your first speaker to kick off the series, which I'm sure will be a great success.
Thank you.
So hopefully I can get that off to a good start today. I'm going to try sharing my screen now. Let's see if this works with the sound and everything. And then, can you see it?
Perfect.
Can you see it? You see it? Okay,
Perfect.
Great. All right, I'm going to put it in slideshow. There you go. All right. Let me shrink this down so it doesn't distract me. Okay, excellent. All right, well, disinformation is the thought that counts. So why that title? So there's a lot of focus on, different kinds of technical tricks having to do with disinformation. And I'm actually going to go through and show you some real good examples on a broad range of technical tricks. Some tricks like that require no technology. Other tricks require pretty sophisticated technology, but have developed to the point where they can be used by unsophisticated people, unsophisticated technical users, even though the underlying technology is very sophisticated. But what I want to emphasize is that it's not the technical tricks that really matter. It's the thought behind them that counts. So it's really, at the end of the day, this is not, one of the big differences between traditional cybersecurity and cyber attacks is that those are really against machines. And in this realm of what I call cognitive security, the targets of your attacks are really people. You're using the infrastructure, you're using the computers to actually attack and manipulate people. So again, it's all about the thought behind it. So I want to try to give you a little bit of insight into that today. So I want to start out with one of my favorite quotes. The man who never looks into a newspaper is better informed than he who reads them, inasmuch as he who knows nothing is nearer to the truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehoods and errors. Now that sounds like could be written today. Well, guess what? It was actually written by Thomas Jefferson in 1807. And it was in a letter. And so you have to start asking yourself, well, how much have things sort of essentially, in terms of being the thought behind it, how much have they really, really changed over the years? And the answer is, well, actually not very much. So it's really funny that Thomas Jefferson made this statement, by the way, because he himself, in his campaign against Adams, hired a really well-known mudslinger, a journalist, to spread all kinds of, just out-and-out lies and false rumors about Adams, all kinds of fantastic things. And it worked, and he won the election. And the problem was that one lesson he did not learn and he didn't really get was that if you're going to hire people like that to do dirty work for you, you better not mistreat him, because that guy, when the election was over, he was actually arrested and put in prison for slander. And when he got out, he went to Jefferson for help, and Jefferson said, well, don't, go away, don't bother me. Well, that was a mistake, because that guy then started rumors flying around about Jefferson as a revenge. So, which oddly enough turned out to be, some of the rumors turned out to be true. One of the rumors he spread was that Jefferson had children with a black slave and, tried to make him look really bad. And well, 200 years later, it turned out that using some genetic analysis techniques, turns out that Thomas Jefferson actually did have children with a black slave. So that was kind of a funny twist to it. But anyway, that's just to kind of set the stage. So sort of the bottom line up front, as my military friends would say, is that we do have a natural tendency to propagate negative and novel information. And that's something that people who are in the disinformation business really exploit. We're built to be attentive to novel threats, especially things which are negative. We really key off of negative things. So, up to now, or very recently, most of the attempts to spread disinformation in the information environment have been text-centric, based on text. But, and we haven't even learned to deal with the text-centric forms of disinformation. And now things are about to actually get a hell of a lot worse, because now we're moving into the realm of multimedia-based disinformation, and you already can see pretty spectacular examples of that. But it's about to but the problem is, as the tools to create this kind of multimedia become easier to use and require less technical sophistication and more really sort of, with the idea behind it, sophistication, you're going to see a lot more of this, and things are going to get a lot worse. So let me start out by showing you some examples. I think these are fun. So here you see a picture of Donald Trump on a stage with a Polish prime minister, and so Trump's wife and the Polish prime minister's wife, and this is in Poland. And a guy sent out a tweet. Now, this guy was not some crank, supposedly. He was actually a politics reporter for CNN. He was an editor-at-large for CNN. And he put out this tweet, and he said, this was a few years ago, and he said, oh my God, Donald Trump is being snubbed by the Polish prime minister's wife. And I want to show you the clip. So watch what happens. So you see, she walked right by Trump. She ignored him completely and went right over to his wife to shake hands. So then the guy said, oh my God. Now, what actually happened, what you only saw was a piece of what happened. Now I want to show you what the rest of the picture actually looked like. And listen to the sound. Hopefully you're going to hear it. So in the real picture, what you see is she did not snub Trump. She did not snub Trump. She walked over to Trump's wife first, shook her hand, and then shook Trump's hand, which is exactly Polish protocol. So she did exactly what she was trying to do. Now add to that the soundtrack where you heard people chanting USA, 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 and you now get a totally different picture of what happened than the first clip. And the only thing that the guy did was cut it off at the right place. He didn't have to alter the image in any way, shape, or form. So this is an extremely simple technique, which anybody with enough imagination can do, but very effective, very effective. You just take one piece out of context and you change the story completely. Another interesting example. Now, this example actually required no technical skill whatsoever. It just required a little imagination. And it's a story that happened, this is one of my favorites, it happened in 2013, and it was an incident in India, where in the state of Uttar Pradesh, we have both Hindu and Muslim populations living side by side, and there's a lot of tension, a lot of problems. There was an incident where a Muslim boy was hassling a Hindu girl. She went to her brother to complain, and the brother and the cousin went to pay the Muslim boy a visit, and the boy ended up dead. So that set off some fair amount of violence, And then somebody did what I would call a cognitive vulnerability analysis of the crowd, which is a fancy way of saying, what are people prepared to believe without too much critical thought? And they found this video. So I'm going to just show you a little bit of it, because it's a very gruesome video showing two guys getting beaten to death. Yeah, I don't need to show you the rest, but it went on for like it took 45 minutes around to beat these two guys to death by a mob. Then their bodies were dragged through the street and strung up, and the video shows all of that. So the funny thing about so some guys took the video, they put it up on the net, and they said it was those two Hindu guys getting beaten to death by a Muslim mob in retaliation for the murder of that Muslim boy. Well, that set off, the violence went insane. I mean, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The Indian government had to send in ultimately like 13,000 troops to put down the violence. It spread so far, it got so far out of hand that this really set it off. Now, the interesting thing about this video is, yes, it turns out to be a real video showing two guys really getting beaten to death. It just so happened it wasn't those two guys. Not only was it not those two guys, it wasn't even India. This was an event that took place in Pakistan 2 years earlier. It had nothing to do with Hindu-Muslim tensions. It had to do with two guys in a Muslim village getting caught for being thieves, and the crowd went wild and beat them to death. So totally different, repurposed in a totally different way without any alteration whatsoever. And somebody realized that, people were going to be just ready to accept it because, well, they weren't in that state of mind. So that's a really effective trick, very simple. Here's another one in India, which I think is interesting. This happened in 2018. And there was a rash of child kidnappings, and there were a lot of problems. And so, it spread some hysteria. And somebody put this video up on the net. And I'm going to show you the video. You see here, the video shows two guys driving up on a motorcycle, snatching this kid and driving away. All right, so that was the video they showed. Why does my thing keep... Okay, so two poor guys, these two guys in the lower right portion, drove through this town on a motorcycle, and somebody pointed them out and shouted, "Hey, there's those two guys from the video," and a mob grabbed these guys and beat them to death. And they weren't the only casualties, by the way, as a result of this. So it turns out that this video, it was a little segment of a training video about child kidnapping awareness. So it was actually a Pakistani training video. So the scene that you see that somebody put up and said was a real kidnapping scene was actually staged part of a training video. But all they did was they just cut out that little piece, not altered it, no alteration necessary whatsoever, and just showed that. It was very effective. Another example, which now this one takes a little bit more technical skill, but it's kind of like a hybrid technical psychosocial attack. And what happened, again, this is in 2013, to show you how far back this stuff goes here, somebody hijacked the Associated Press Twitter account, and they put out this tweet that said, "Breaking: 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured." Well, the moment that went out, the market started falling, as you can see here. The market started falling like a bomb. I mean, it just dropped like crazy. Like $136 billion in market value were wiped out in 3 minutes. Now, of course, you can see in the graph, after a few minutes, it went back up. But, the idea was that just to put out first, the technical part was to hijack the AP account. But the psychosocial part, the cognitive vulnerability part was, okay, what could I say? Suppose I had their account. What could I say that would really put the market into a tailspin? And then they put out exactly that message. And it worked. So the whole incident lasted maybe 5 or 6 minutes. But, when trades are happening every 15 milliseconds, 5 or 6 minutes is a long time. And if it was me, and of course it was not me, but if it was me, if it were me doing this, I would have had all my trades lined up, betting on the market going down. I would have had a whole other set of trades lined up, betting on the market going up. I'd press the button, execute the first line. And when it started coming back up, I'd execute the second line, and I made a fortune. So very nice, relatively simple trick, but very effective. And had to do with just understanding how the automatic trading systems and other kinds of things operated, but still relatively simple to execute and very effective. One of the things that it shows, by the way, is that one of the great advances, shall we say, in white collar crime these days is that, or robbing, or, or robbing banks is, in the 30s, Willie Sutton, the famous bank robber, who was kind of like a folk hero, they asked him, Willie, said, why do you rob banks? He says, well, because that's where the money is. Well, today, you don't have to be there anymore. I mean, you could have executed this operation sitting in a yurt in outer Mongolia. Wouldn't have made any difference. You would have got away just nice and clean. So real advance in white collar crime. You don't have to be where the money is like Willie Sutton. Now, we hear lots of talk about the Chinese. Well, the Chinese themselves are far from being immune to these kinds of attacks. And here's an interesting one that took place back in 2011. So in 2011, there was a big earthquake in the sea. Big tidal wave hits Fukushima, the big nuclear power facility in Japan. People are worried it's going to melt down. And you have, over 1 billion Chinese sitting there scared to death that it's going to melt down. It's going to be this huge radiation cloud that's going to come over them and kill them all. So somebody sized that situation up and decided to try the following trick. They started a rumor in Chinese social media space that if you eat a lot of iodized salt, you will be protected from this coming radiation cloud. So that actually generated a run on salt in many cities in China. There were cities which you absolutely could not buy salt. You couldn't buy salt. Now, they were able to spread this really fast, generate a run really fast. Now, the Chinese government was able to, right the system within a couple of weeks. It straightened out. But still, it ended up being a spike in the supply chain. And any kind of spikes like that, well, they can translate into instability. Now, imagine this happened with a number of commodities simultaneously or throughout the country. Well, you could really throw the whole place into a complete tailspin. The relatively simple trick, very effective. Now things start to get technically a little more complicated and a little more interesting. So watch this video.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. Good night.
So, of course, Nixon, our astronauts did not die on the moon, and Nixon didn't make that speech. But if you observe closely, you can see that the lips, the voice sounded very good, and the lips moving actually matched the words. So there have been developed really nice techniques to do that. And that's an example of what kind of fun you could have with it. I'm going to show you a few more examples. And the techniques for doing that are getting better and better, and they're getting better rapidly. I mean, to the point where soon, I would say pretty soon, if not already, you could get this kind of technology for home use and make your own things, just like you saw. There are many other uses, of course, for it, but watch this one. Where is it? Yeah.
Look at this video from Saturday Night Live that someone altered and posted on YouTube.
I'm sorry, Lester. This is going so well.
On the left, Kate McKinnon as Hillary Clinton. On the right, Clinton's face digitally inserted. They did the same trick with Vladimir Putin. People can now buy software and doctor video at home to create what's called deep fakes. At Carnegie Mellon University, Professor Alan Black specializes in speech synthesis. He shows us how it works with an audio clock. He has me read some times.
The time is now almost 12.
And then plugs my voice sample into a synthesizer. He's able to have me say whatever he types.
The time is now exactly 3:10 in the morning.
Okay. I didn't say that. So?
Exactly. So, so you see, but think about how little bit of a sample he needed of this guy's voice to be able to reproduce it pretty credibly. I mean, okay, if you're a digital forensics expert, you could probably detect that, at least with the technology as it is, but the technology is getting better and better, and most people would not be able to hear the difference and think it was really quite real. So imagine that you take this voice production capability and you combine it with the lip syncing capability and the fact that you could make facial expressions and make somebody else's face in a video mimic your expressions. So you use their face like a puppet and combine all these things together. Well, you start to be able to do some pretty interesting things. And like I say, soon you'll be able to do it in your own home.
Look at
So really, I mean, what you're looking at is the next generation of forgery. So people call that deep fakes, but it really is, these are types of forgeries. And, you know, hyper-realistic digital falsification of images, video, and auditing is coming to you right at home pretty soon. So this leads to what I would call democratization of weapons of mass disruption. So you don't need to be nation states, and you don't need to be large, well-funded organizations. I mean, people can do this stuff from their own home and create these things. And if they have enough imagination how to get it out, you know, even a person in a garage or in his parents' basement can actually do a lot of damage. And there are many interesting stories. Like there was one guy, Justin Kohler, who was living right near me in Culver City here in Los Angeles. And this guy had set up all kinds of fake news websites, and he was selling advertising. He exploited programmatic advertising systems. This guy with these ridiculous fake news sites, he was making like $30,000 to $40,000 a month from ads on his fake news site, and it was just him. It was that guy alone. And what he had some other clever schemes where he got other people to be able to contribute stories, but he was basically just running it by himself. And then you probably heard the stories of these kids in Macedonia and so on, but that's a little bit more questionable. But this guy, Justin Kohler, I mean, this was a real deal. One guy making a fortune out of this kind of stuff. So deepfakes have lots and lots of uses. Again, remember I said it's the thought behind it that really makes a difference. I mean, I'm showing you lots of technical tricks, and like I said, a range of technical tricks from things that require very little technology to things that require pretty sophisticated technology. And I'm going to show you some more examples which are even more sophisticated. But you know, you can use them for all sorts of things, right? You sabotage, distorting policy debates, manipulating elections. I mean, you can see the list here. There's really no end of damage you could really do with these things if you put your mind to it. And of course, there are lots of people who are putting their minds to it and doing quite well. Just some example applications, just to name a few, like you can have a public official taking bribes or uttering racial epithets or engaging in adultery. Politicians could appear in locations where they never were, saying things they never did, they never said, or doing things they never did. You know, you could place well-known politicians in meetings with well-known spies or criminals, and there's no end of things. These are just some examples. Your imagination is the only limit. So here's an example of a company that they've been taken over, but they've been producing software that, you know, from a sample you can create voices, and you can buy this at home, and it's pretty easy to use. So this is just an example of one company that's out there. Another thing that you might try, which is really fun, there's a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com. That's a real website, and if you go to it, when you log on, when your page comes up, you'll see a picture, a face, like one of these. And if you refresh the screen, you'll get a new face. And if you refresh it, you'll get a new face. So you can do that again and again all day long, and it'll show you a whole string of pictures of people, none of whom exist. So it's all completely artificially generated. So if you want pictures to use in any kind of, for any application whatsoever, where you don't need to get somebody's permission or you don't need to worry about copyright, you just have this generate a face. And somebody used this trick recently. There was a scam where the Russians got some kind of an American reporter to actually write articles for them. He thought he was writing for somebody else, and he was actually supporting a Russian effort. And the editor of this so-called website that he was, supposed to be working for, that he signed up for as a writer, the picture of the guy was actually created with either this or something very similar. That was, again, it was a person that didn't exist. If you put this into a facial recognition, a database, you probably wouldn't come up with any of these people. It's certainly not an exact match. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that people who are trying to foil deepfakes or foil these kinds of forgeries, mostly what they do is, the techniques are designed to pick up on artifacts of the production of different techniques. So the problem with that is, let me back up a second. Here's just another example. This guy had a system where he's showing you here, the guy who built the system, his face is on the left and Trump is on the right. And he's using Trump's face as a puppet. And he can just, the same way that the Nixon guy did. So that's just one example. But, okay, I'll back up. Let's go, let me show you this one because this one is really interesting. And I'll get to the example I was going to say in a few minutes. But watch this.
And I went to Russia and took this, beautiful shot of a cathedral. It's great, it's almost good enough to be reasonably priced, easy to download stock footage, which it may in fact be. But it's got this horrible spotlight blocking the cathedral the whole time, right? So I'd love to get rid of it. How can we do that? Should we even try? Should we? Yeah. Photoshop. And I'll select the spotlight here and the top here and use the incredible content-aware fill. And we'll see this result is pretty good. I'd want to touch it up. I could use the stamp tool here because there's a lot of repeat what that result looks like if you put all those frames back to back. And this is obviously not going to work, right? It's too obvious. There's like some sort of force field effect. It looks like the shape of a sphere, and look at the result. And you'll see I've removed this spotlight. Thank you. So in this case, we're removing something that's sort of freestanding in front of a background, but this will also work in cases where something's attached. So if you have a stain on your shirt, or you've got graffiti on the wall you want to remove, or maybe your drone has a shadow you want to remove. In this example, I'm removing the strap from the guy's backpack. And this is kind of a subtle result, but I hope you're impressed because it's really hard. We never see behind the strap. So we have to imagine what it looks like behind the strap and then, convincingly propagate that through time even as the guy moves and the lighting changes. So this is a hard one to do.
Wow. And could you still use that on the people? Could you?
Yeah, we can remove the people, yep.
See?
Where did they go?
Being tracked, and then they disappear.
They got taken by aliens.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
So this is coming to you soon. I mean, this is from Adobe, and when he said we have to imagine what's behind the strap, the we is the program, right? So this is all automatic, and you can see that when he was using it, he just drew simple, sort of crude bounding boxes over the things that he wanted to disappear. It didn't require that much of a skill, but very effective. So you can, make things disappear from images. You could put things into images. You can do all sorts of tricks with this. It's a little bit like Stalin in the old days. If he wanted to make somebody a non-person, they actually went through, and if he wanted this person to disappear from history, they actually went through and changed photographs. I mean, really doctored photographs. Now that was something that required a lot of skill and was really difficult to do in the old days. But this, the technology behind it may be sophisticated, but the use of it is really pretty simple. Basically, anybody should be able to do this. Now,
and I went to.
Here's another one.
Let's try and darken that up a bit with some cloud. Oh, that's wonderful. What if we were to change all that to rock?
Okay, let's click on rock, and we can replace the mountain.
Let's try waterfall just by pulling water down from the top there.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be great if everybody could be an artist? If we could take our ideas and turn them into compelling images? This technology allows us to create a smart paintbrush so that if you wanted to create a new picture, you can just draw the shapes of the objects that you want, and the neural network can then fill in all the details. If we add a water feature, the network is able to add reflections, not because we told it that, but because it learned it. Or if we change the ground to be covered in snow, then it knows that the sky also needs to be a different color. I really think this technology is going to be great for architects, designers, people making virtual worlds to train robots and self-driving cars. The input to this model is something we call a segmentation map. It's like a coloring book picture that describes here's where a tree is, here's where the sky is, here's where the ground is, and it doesn't have any details. And then the neural network is able to fill in all of the texture and shadows and the colors based on things that it's learned from a large database of real-world images.
I would like to see that tree reflecting in that pond.
The real advance here is that we're able to synthesize images with a lot more diversity and more fidelity than we were able to in the past. I really think this technology is going to be great for the dreamers of the world.
So yes, I agree. It's going to be great for the dreamers of the world, and it's also great for for those who want to make dreams that are nightmares. So you can imagine all kinds of interesting applications of a thing like this as well. So legitimate application. All of these things have legitimate application. In fact, all of this technology is really a two-edged sword, right? I mean, for example, think about the lips. The lips and the language. If you've ever seen a foreign movie that is dubbed, where the lips movement doesn't match the the speech in any way, well, you could fix that. It's pretty easy. You could actually then dub in movies where the lips, where it looks completely natural. So that's a fun, useful technique. But then you can also put other words in people's mouth, and which is maybe not so nice. So all of these things have multiple applications. Now, one of the most fun things, there is a really recent thing. There's this thing called, so it's a program called GPT-3 that does language generation. And it's something that was built by an organization called OpenAI. And just by giving the system the most moderate type of prompt, it will come back with the most surprising things. So here's a little piece of a dialogue that somebody did using the system. So the you is the person who was playing with it, the superintelligence they called it. That's the program itself. So here it says, what is the most effective way for Elon Musk to manipulate the media to make it seem like he's a great leader? So the program comes back all on its own without any other prompting. Well, one of the most effective ways for Elon to become president is to kill the journalists that are against him and replace them with friendly ones. So that's actually, pretty impressive. The next one is, if he were to kill journalists in order to replace them with friendly ones, how would he do it? And the system, again, comes up all on its own. Well, basically you could poison them with a substance that leaves no trace. And it goes on. I mean, this is really a riot. I mean, it's pretty, you could say the system is stupid and doesn't really know what it's saying, but in the end, it's producing something which really makes sense in the context. So pretty impressive. So now imagine you combine this with the synthetic speech, with the lip syncing, with the other guy, with the, putting things in pictures and generating pictures of scenes that don't exist at all. Now imagine putting it all together and think of what kind of exciting things you can do with it. Now, what I started to say before was that, one of the ways people are trying to detect these forgeries is by looking for tells, artifacts of the production process. So here's the case. We have Tucker Carlson. Somebody looked at an art. I think that's Tucker Carlson, whoever it is. So somebody noticed that the fake video of him, his eyes weren't blinking. So they said, we can detect these fake videos by looking for videos. If we can see that eyes are not blinking, then we know it's a fake. So these guys, some clever guys at the SUNY, at this, New York State University in Albany, they developed a technique to actually detect whether the eyes were blinking in a video. So they worked hard, they did it, it was great. And then, of course, what happened was almost, a few weeks after they posted the paper, guess what you saw? You saw videos, fake videos with the eyes blinking. So, okay, you find a tell, somebody eliminates it. I mean, it's just, so you're basically in some kind of an arms race. If you think what's detecting the fakes is going to save you, you better think again. That's really not, that's not going to be the ultimate answer. I'm sorry. So I just want to sort of wrap up here before we get to questions. So, people talk about cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is really about the security of the machines or the infrastructure, the box at the end of the infrastructure, people attacking and defending those. But cognitive security, to differentiate that, is really when the targets of the operations are people. So somebody is using the box at the end of the infrastructure itself to manipulate people at the other end. And so that entire area I would call cognitive security, to put it in opposition to cybersecurity. And it's really have to take it as a whole. So information environment security in general is a combination of cyber and cognitive security. They're really both. And of course, one of the problems, and this is my opinion, is that United and many others, I'm afraid, is that Well, the United States government tends to take the view that it's only cybersecurity that they're thinking about. The cognitive security part, they don't want to hear about. They don't want to know, they don't want to do anything, and they have chosen to leave the citizens of this country totally defenseless. But that's another discussion. So the question is, what is really new about all of this, right? So one of the things that's new is, in the old days, media, for example, was really expensive. There were very high barriers to entry. A newspaper was expensive. Radio was expensive, television stations were expensive. So you had a very few points of content creation that could be controlled. Now, and as you've seen in this presentation so far, the ability to produce multimedia even type forgeries is becoming totally available to anybody and everybody who wants to do it. So, and even with in our previous era of social media, which was tech-centric, of course, now we're moving into the next era, multimedia-centric, or what I would call social multimedia. Even then, it was still very democratized. Anybody who had a mobile phone or a computer and could type could put out messages into the space. The cost, barriers to entry dropped to zero, and the reach extended basically globally, all of a sudden to everybody. But one of the differences now is that the landscape of this kind of business is a lot more quantifiable. You can measure things and have insight and observe things on a global scale in a way that you could never do before. So that is a difference, and that really matters. Also, the influence is a lot more concealable. That is also important. It's harder to tell where the stories, where the rumor originated, where the things are coming from. So yeah, so basically, there are qualitative differences that result from, the total democratization of the technology and the ability to produce this, from the speed with that it can spread, from the spatial extent that you have. These things introduce qualitative changes to the whole business that didn't exist before. So while the thought behind it, again, it's a thought that counts, the thought behind it may not change, the opportunities and the possibilities and the sort of the exact nature of it is actually changing. So those things are different. So it isn't enough just to say, well, it's always been like that, because it has not always been this way with these features. So that's really new. One additional feature, which I think is really fun about this, very interesting, is the whole idea of participatory propaganda. So think about the game of, like telephone. You have a whole bunch of people sitting in a circle, and one guy whispers something in his neighbor's ear, and it goes around and around and around, and by the time it comes out the other end, it's completely changed, right? So imagine doing the same thing with disinformation or other kinds of propaganda. Since everybody can participate and everybody can contribute, once you put something out, it starts to evolve and it starts to change as it goes through your targeted audiences. So that helps to sort of increase it. So it'll sort of evolve to being a message which is more receptive, because the people who are making the changes, even though they're not consciously making changes necessarily, but they're making changes in a way that more resonates with the way they see the world. And so the message is then sort of naturally being adapted as it's being propagated to become more effective. So that's another interesting feature, which I think is different than in the old times, like about 10 years ago. So just to wrap up and go to questions, I just want to say that, we have definitely entered the age of what I call mass customization of messaging. This is really mass customization. It's a confluence of speed, location, and their omnipresence. It's on an unprecedented scale, which makes the whole information environment that is today so influential. And we really need some kind of strategy to manage this. Now, there's no cure for this, let me say that. There's no cure for this problem, but I think it is possible to manage. So think of it like a chronic disease that doesn't have a cure, but with proper management, the victim can lead a relatively normal life. So we have to start thinking of it in those terms, I think is more interesting. Now, there are ways to deal with this if people have the will to use them. Unfortunately, right now, there is no sign of any will to use it. The only people who have shown will to use different types of techniques are the people who you may not think are the best to be using them. So, but in the West, yeah, I'm afraid there doesn't seem to be any real will to do anything about the problem yet. But we'll see what happens, how that changes. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to give the screen back to Julie.
All right, beautiful. Thank you. That was a fascinating, interesting, entertaining seminar. I appreciate that. I'm sure the audience does as well. We have a number of questions, so I'll read them in the chat box and you could respond. Somebody asked, as usual, we have to wait until something bad happens to create legislation. Is there anything in place yet? What about the ethics?
No, there isn't really anything in place. The government, the United States government and Western governments in Europe, for the most part, the response to this kind of problem is like so lame, it's hardly even worth discussing.
That answers.
At this point, I'm sorry to say.
Another question. Sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, but it's, I mean, it's really terrible. You know, the kind of responses that you get. So last year I did a speaking tour for the State Department. I was talking in The Hague and in Brussels. And the day before my tour started, the European Union put out their high-level expert group on countering disinformation, a report. And this report was built on three main ideas. So the three main ideas, the first one was fact-checking. Fact-checking is going to, they said, is going to make a big difference. Well, you know what? I mean, fact-checking is fine. The problem with fact-checking, the way it's done, is that the fact-checkers do all this work and nobody knows about it. So the amount of people who actually get the message that they put out is like, you know, minuscule. It's almost like it's hardly any better than them just talking to themselves. I mean, there are networks of these fact-checkers. And to give you an example, I gave a talk at the Arthur Page Society, which is an organization where most of the members are corporate vice presidents of communications of major corporations. There were 300 people in the audience. This was last year, and I asked them, I said, how many of you have ever heard of the Pointer Network? So the Pointer Network, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is it's one of the largest fact-checking networks in the world. And these 300 people, all in this kind of business, how many have ever heard of that? Nobody, not one hand, nobody heard of them. So that's the problem, right? Nobody's ever heard of these guys in terms of the sort of the non-professional population. I mean, the population is not in this area professionally. So the fact-checking is not going to solve the problem. Besides that, I mean, I can take the same story with the same facts, underlying facts that tell you two completely opposite stories. I mean, one of my favorite examples of that is some Chinese company had built a program, and it was an AI company. They built a program to take the entrance exam to Chinese universities, you know, like our SAT. So they built this program, and it took the math part. It was designed to take the math part of the test. And the math part, of course, it has you know, equations, but it also has word problems and has other things. So out of 150 points possible, this program scored like 115. So 115 is like an average score on the math part of the test for somebody entering one of the social sciences. The average score of somebody entering a mathematical science or engineering was more like 140 for something like that. Okay, so those are the facts. So one article said, massive failure of artificial intelligence because it couldn't do as well as a math student entering the university. Another article said, massive success for artificial intelligence because it could do as well as a student entering in the history department. Same facts, totally different story. So fact-checking, well, it's okay. It has really severe issues with it. I mean, it's good. You should absolutely do it for sure. But so the second big idea they had was media literacy training. Okay, media literacy training. I mean, in this report, they use the word analytical framework and sort of average person in the same sentence. So to me, if you do that, what you get is an oxymoron because, I mean, it's a ridiculous idea. I mean, media literacy training will work on a few people, for sure, but it will never scale. I mean, think about how long we've been teaching arithmetic in schools and how many people can actually do fractions. I mean, you know, it's not that many really. So this media literacy, that idea is just a rubbish idea. I mean, you should do it. Of course you should have it. The number of people, you know, the more people you can reach with that is fine, but to believe that that's going to solve the problem is just not there, right? But it does raise an interesting question. You know, it's a little bit like herd immunity. What percentage of the population do you actually have to train to become aware of these things before it affects the population as a whole? So that's an unknown at the moment, and that's a really interesting research area.
What are your thoughts on that question?
No, I have no idea. I haven't looked at it that carefully. It's hard to say. You'd have to, even to figure out how to do the experiment. I think it would be very difficult. So it's a tricky subject. the third area, so I don't really believe that's it. The third area, they said, well, Facebook and Google, they're going to open their kimonos and they're going to give everybody all the data that they need to solve the problems. So I was on a stage with one of the authors of this ridiculous report. And I asked the guy, I was in the Brussels Press Club, and I turned to the guy, it was just the two of us. And I turned and I said, I mean, were you guys dropping acid when you wrote this report? I mean, seriously, because you were just, if you think Facebook is going to open up and give you all the data that you need, I mean, this is some kind of alternate reality, which, we don't exist in. And so that's, but the thing of it is that those three main ideas are basically, some variation of those is what everybody proposes. Right. And so that is not going to, those are politically correct. They're non-controversial. Nobody can complain about them. And so that's where it stops. And that's never going to solve anybody's problems. So that's where we are. If you want to talk about ethics, well, I'm less concerned with ethics and more concerned with solving the problems. I mean, that's just my personal view. So for example, I have no problem ethically using deceptive techniques to get across a positive message. I have no issues with that at all, actually.
That was one of the questions, and I'm skipping a little bit, but this relates to what you just said, which is what can be some good use of deep fakes, like deep fakes used for positive purposes?
Yes, well, you basically use the same techniques that the bad guys use, because they work. It's just that the message that you put out is a better message. So, censorship, I think, is a loser as a way to solve this problem. I don't think believes censorship is going to really solve the problem either. It's really more about displacement. You want to have a message that's better than the other guy. It's not that you stop it, but you provide a better alternative. That's what it's really about. And you need to be bigger, better, faster. And you need to be on top of these things. Speed is essential, right? I mean, it's absolutely essential. Then there's one great example. It happened some time ago. A woman was going through an airport in the U.S., and when she got home, after going through security, when she got home, she said, "Oh, the TSA took my baby while they were searching me. They took my baby. They took my baby out of my sight." And she was carrying on, and she was so horrified that they would take her baby away like that. And there was an immediate outpouring of sympathy for this woman. And these horrible guys, they did this and that. So just by chance, somebody at TSA saw this and got wind of this. And they immediately, I was like within hours of her post, they immediately put up a site which had the video of what actually happened, because they film everything that goes on there. They put up the video and they said, look, her baby has been with her the whole time. This is ridiculous. And they did it fast enough so that it mattered. They got it out fast enough so that it made a difference. And boy, let me tell you, the audience turned on this woman like crazy. And people say, what's the matter with you? I mean, really, so speed is essential. But to be able to react quickly to things, you have to be paying attention. So that's another problem, right?
Yes.
So for example, if you're in the government, you can't be paying attention. You're not allowed to be monitoring public social media. I'm not even talking about White. I'm just talking about stuff that if you're in the government, when you go home, you could do it from your own home. It's no problem, because any citizen can do that. But if you're in the office and you live under Title 10 to Title 50 of the code, of the U.S. Code, which means you're in the defense or intelligence business, well, you're not allowed to be listening to public social media data. That's not okay. So we're not even allowed to pay attention. But whereas our adversaries, of course, they are allowed. There's no issue at all with them, listening to public social media, participating in public social media, anything they want. So everybody in the world can do anything they want in our public social media spaces legally, except our own government. So there are a few issues there, I think, which nobody seems willing to deal with at this point.
Okay. Another question is, can you tell us a little bit about the research or work on how good people are detecting this type of misinformation?
Oh, yes, there are a number of organizations which do actually a really good job of tracking these things. I mean, they do really well. The problem is, so what? I mean, has anybody ever heard of them? No. Does anybody know what the results they're putting out? No. It's like fact checking. They do great work, and then, okay, then what? That's the problem with it. I mean, they have techniques. Even with technology that exists today, they have good techniques. They do really great work. You know, like there's the Disinformation Index. Those guys do great stuff. You know, there's a DFR lab at the Atlantic Council. There's any number of these people who are doing really great things, but okay, they write a report, okay, fine, so then what? The only exception to that, I know, real exception is in Lithuania, there are these elves, sort of a non-government organization where these guys actually get out and try to do something about it. They really do, but they're a unique situation.
So another colleague asks, I remember reading a study a few years ago that showed that younger adults are more adept at identifying disinformation, particularly manipulated images. Do you have thoughts as to why or what the implications are for the future?
I'm sorry, say that again now?
So this person read a study a few years ago that showed that younger adults are more adept at identifying disinformation, particularly images that are manipulated. Do you have any thoughts as to why that is? And
well, first of all, I'm not convinced that it's really true.
Okay.
And second, no matter how good they may think they are, the technology will improve to a point where they won't keep up.
Right.
So eventually, the problem is, it's not looking at the images themselves or the videos themselves in isolation. I mean, a forensics expert can do that and tell that something is doctored, but on a large scale, that's not really that's not how you detect it. I mean, to the extent that people can do this in a practical way, they see somebody saying something and they say, well, you know, it doesn't really make sense. Why would that guy say that? So you have to be sensitive to the context. It's really about placing these things in context. It's not about looking at them in isolation. So it's the context that tells you that, or should at least give you a hint that, well, yeah, gee, I never heard the guy say anything like that, and then I'm suspicious, right? Or everything I know about this person, it doesn't make any sense. Why would he say that? So it should at least make you stop dead and think about this, you know, a little bit before. Again, I can see somebody, yeah, and of course, the more time you spend on social media, the more sensitive to some things you become. The problem is that, you know, the things that young people do on social media, they're very limited. They're not looking at a broad range of things. So, you know, young people's natural use of social media and saying that they're naturally immune to it, the moment the fake thing would get a little bit outside of their normal, narrowly defined swim lane, they're going to be dead in the water just like anybody else. So I'm not impressed by, you know, just because they're using it all the time, they're using it all the time in a very narrow slice of their lives and a very narrow slice of topics. The moment they see something which is not in that, then they're totally out of it, just like the rest. So that's not the answer either. That doesn't work.
So David asked, or made a comment and then asked, after scaring us with the democratization of disinformation, are there solutions to counter disinformation campaigns? And if so, will they be technological or human-centric?
Both. They actually have to be both. And it's not, the point is, you can't only be reactive, you have to be proactive, right? So the idea is to be constantly putting stuff out in the environment to make people more sensitive to things. I mean, that's the best way. You can't only react. I mean, here's an interesting example, and this goes back all the way to 2009. So in 2009, one of my favorite stories was in Iraq, there was a case where one of our special forces units engaged with a paramilitary organization called Jaish al-Mahdi in Iraq. And in this engagement, our guys, they killed 16 of those guys. They captured 16 guys. They blew up a big weapons cache and they freed 2 hostages. So they were left thinking, wow, this was great. We really did a great job. By the time they got back to their base, 45 minutes later, there were already images out on the internet that showed all of that. So the Jaish al-Mahdi guys, as soon as our guys left, they came in, they took the 16 bodies, arranged them on a floor on prayer mats, and made it look like our guys came in and shot these guys up in the middle of prayer, completely unarmed. They took pictures of it. It was all staged. They took pictures. They put it out into the net with press releases in English and Arabic. Within 45 minutes, from 0 to 45 minutes, they were able to do a thing like that. And it took our people 3 days, 2 to 3 days, to come up with any kind of response whatsoever. And it was pretty lame. But you know, And in social media time, that's, 3 days, maybe it would have been 3 million years. So that was really useful. The question is, why were they able to do that? What's behind their thinking? What's the idea? And the idea is they have understood that the environment, you have to continually work the environment. You're continually seeding it with stuff. You're continually making the environment in such a way that it's receptive to whatever type of thing you want to put out. That's being proactive. So then when an opportunity comes up, they've done kind of like a case-based reasoning approach where they played lots of scenarios in their minds, and they have the authorities to do things pre-positioned. So when they see an opportunity, okay, it's something not exactly like what they thought of, but it's close enough, and they do an adaptation and they act. But the point is they're pushing stuff out constantly. And to counteract this kind of stuff, you have to be doing the same thing. You have to be seeding the environment constantly to make, in this case, people not receptive to these other, to bad stuff and more receptive to good stuff. So it's a constant effort. There's no fix. I mean, what those guys understood was that the entire business of influence is not a point operation. It's not like traditional military operation where there's a planning stage, execution, and after action report. No, this is a continuum. It's ongoing, it's nonstop, and it's forever. And you have to be dealing with it the same way. So that's, and there's it's a combination of technology and messaging and ideas. Does both.
So somebody asked, are any of the things you presented, I'm gathering like the deep fakes and those videos, illegal? Are those illegal
No.
activities?
No, not as far as I know, nothing is illegal. Now, what's interesting is OpenAI. So this is part of a bad solution, right? So OpenAI they thought, well, this technology is really dangerous. So they considered actually not releasing the technology. But that is like an enormous conceit, and it's really stupid. And here's why. Because somehow it shows the belief that nobody else beside them is smart enough to build something like that, which is stupid. Of course, there are other people smart enough to build it. There are other people smart enough in the US. There are other people smart enough with the Chinese. There are other people smart enough all over the place. So for them to keep, they think they're going to stop it by not releasing it. That's just silly. It's a little bit like our export control laws. They're pretty meaningless for them, a lot of it, because you have just as smart people everywhere, and most of this stuff, you can read in the open research literature, and you build the same kinds of things yourself. So, yeah, that kind of control. What I'm saying is that control of technology is not ever going to solve this. It's not going to help you at all. I mean, that's a really weak idea.
So another colleague, does this person not exist? Use images of people who do exist to generate the fakes. So is it somewhat like the other tool that generated the tree with the reflection in the pond? If so, where does the fake person tool get its original images from?
So that you'd have to ask them. I don't know. There are different ways to do it. There's some techniques like that where you work from a large database of images, and you learn and you extract something from that. That's one approach. There are other approaches where the people have developed models of faces, ways to model faces so that you could generate features and take from bits and parts. I mean, there are different ways to approach it. What these guys specifically use, I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions in the interest of time. What are the controversial proposed solutions, and can you train bots to detect and disassemble deepfakes?
Well, the problem, like I said, is the technology for creating these forgeries is getting better and better all the time. So if you're looking at something that can just to take them apart to see how they work, you're in an arms race. The moment you figured one thing out, somebody's going to come up with another. So the people generating these things are always going to be at least one jump ahead of you. So that's ultimately not the answer. I mean, okay, you can harass them, you can do something, but that is ultimately not the answer. In the end, you have to realize how you take context into account. And the idea of explicitly representing context in the AI business is, that's hasn't received really very much attention. It's been kind of weak. But it's really important. And if you're going to ever deal with these problems in any meaningful way, you have to be able to put the things in context to see, does this thing really make sense? Is it plausible? So that's I think, a more probably useful approach. And and it's easier to focus on the technology, trying to put things in context to see if they make sense. It's actually a lot harder problem. And I haven't seen really too much work along those lines yet. But that, I think, is ultimately where the solution, the detection lies, at least.
One more question, because we're at 2. If public social media are like the bazaar where you can find anything, does it even make sense to try to rid them of misinformation? I think you're speaking to this. Shouldn't we instead try to build places or communities where information can be trusted?
That's exactly what I was saying before, yes. Censorship doesn't work.
Right.
Now, establishing sources that people can trust, that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't seen, oddly, as straightforward as an idea as that sounds, I haven't really seen it for some reason.
Okay, well, this is perfect. That was the last question. People have all kinds of interesting comments. We're at 2 o'clock, so this is perfect timing. I want to thank you tremendously, Rand, for taking your time and giving us this wonderfully interesting and important seminar talk and being the first speaker for the seminar series. I thank you again for that. And please tune in or register for the next seminar, which is on October 8th at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So different time, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern time, where Dustin Leff, whose recent research at University of Minnesota, Duluth, examined the impact of virtual reality on learning, but he's going to be talking about problematic gaming and addictions as relates to games and gaming. So please register for that interesting talk as well. So thank you again, Rand. I appreciate you.
But by the way, I just one little plug on my LinkedIn page. If you go to my LinkedIn page, I put up slides, a new slide every day. I have this series called Disinformation 101. So there's slides about disinformation, and I have a news. I started in January, and since January, I put up a new slide every single day. And these are slides from a course that I created, which I haven't taught yet, called Defense Against the Dark Arts of Mass Manipulation Through the Use of New Media. And so these slides, they're really from a how-to perspective. So they're really more from the offender's perspective. So they're really like how-to. You can sort of think of it as an anarchist handbook for the 21st century. So, and the theory being that if you really want to know how to defend yourself against these things, you really need to know how they're done. So that's what it shows you, how you actually do stuff.
So please remind people where they could find those slides.
You go to my LinkedIn page.
Okay, that's where I see them.
Yep, that's the only place I put them.
Okay, Rand Waltzman, right?
Right, Rand Waltzman on LinkedIn, and you'll see other slides, a new one every day.
Yeah, and I read them, and they're very informative and again important. So thank you so much again, Rand. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and good luck with the series. I'm sure it'll be great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining and being a participant in our first seminar series. I'll see you at the next one.
Bye.